In this video, we're going to talk about how prokaryotes are involved in the carbon and nitrogen cycles. And these are beneficial prokaryotes because these carbon and nitrogen cycles need to happen in order for basically the life as we know it to keep happening. So first, let's talk about the carbon cycle. So the carbon cycle is just the movement of this element carbon between land, water, air, sediments, and biomass. And biomass just refers to living organisms. All right, so biomass includes the carbon that is incorporated into the leaves of a plant or the skin of an animal, for example. The carbon is also converted between inorganic and organic components. And just a quick review, organic compounds all have carbon and hydrogen. So this is a requirement in order to be considered organic. The compound has to have carbon and hydrogen. Now, there might be other elements also involved. So there might also be oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, et cetera, but by definition, organic compounds have to have carbon and hydrogen. Now, inorganic compounds might have carbon or hydrogen, but not both. So, for example, carbon dioxide, CO2, has carbon, but it does not have hydrogen, so it is inorganic. So here's a list of different ways that prokaryotes contribute to the carbon cycle. And we're going to talk about each one of these in more detail on the following slides. So prokaryotes can be primary producers, which are also autotrophs, consumers, which are heterotrophs, decomposers, or involved in anoxic sedimentation. So first, let's talk about our primary producers, and these are our autotrophs, and more specifically, we are referring to the photoautotrophs. And what these photoautotrophs do is they take inorganic carbon dioxide, so CO2 is inorganic, and it converts that into organic compounds. And an example of this organic compound would be glucose, which is C6H12. 6. That's its molecular formula. And this is just the process of photosynthesis. So some examples of organisms that are primary producers, especially when we're talking about prokaryotes, we're talking about the cyanobacteria, but also plants, which are not prokaryotes, but they are primary producers. And algae are also photoautotrophs, but the cyanobacteria, these are the actual prokaryotes that we are focusing on. So as these primary producers do photosynthesis, they're going to decrease carbon dioxide in the environment. So this can be either in the atmosphere or it can also be in an aquatic environment, so in the water. And then it's going to increase the carbon that is in organic compounds. And some examples of organic compounds are going to be things like our carbohydrates. And these organic compounds can become food for other organisms or even food for the autotroph itself. And so it's going to provide nutrients and energy. Now, some prokaryotes are consumers, which we can also call our heterotrophs. And these are organisms that are going to eat other organic organisms in order to get nutrients and energy. So if you recall, cellular respiration, this is this process that organisms use to convert organic compounds into energy, or basically extract energy from those organic compounds. And in doing so, carbon dioxide is released in the process. So these organic compounds, we primarily focus on, once again, our carbohydrates. But we can also be talking about proteins and lipids. So these are all molecules that organisms can extract energy and nutrients from. And our inorganic carbon dioxide gets released in the process. So with cellular respiration, we are going to be increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or in the water, if this is happening in an aquatic environment, and decreasing organic compounds because they are getting consumed and broken down in order to extract that energy. Now, in addition to some prokaryotes, actually a lot of prokaryotes do this cellular respiration. Animals, we are also heterotrophs, so humans and other animals, and some fungi are also, most fungi are heterotrophs. Decomposers are going to be similar to our consumers or our heterotrophs in that they are still taking in organic compounds and releasing carbon dioxide during the decomposition process. So when we're talking about breaking down plant and animal matter, we are talking about biomass. And when we're talking about biomass, we're talking about organic compounds. And once again, the organic compounds that are being broken down are going to be our carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. And the decomposer is going to get energy out of this process, and it's also going to release our carbon dioxide into the environment. So once again, we are increasing carbon dioxide into the environment, whether it's the air or aquatic environment, and we are going to be decreasing these organic compounds. Prokaryotes are also involved in carbon ending up in anoxic sediment. So this word anoxic means without oxygen. So this is an anaerobic environment. So what happens is that prokaryotes, in this case, we're mostly talking about archaea, whereas in the other examples, we were mostly focusing on bacteria. But these archaea produce methane, and this is an organic compound because it has carbon and hydrogen in it. And this methane supports bacteria, which are also prokaryotes. And there are some bacteria that can essentially oxidize methane, or they can break down methane and extract energy from it. And as the bacteria is doing it, it releases carbon dioxide into the environment. So this is one way that, once again, carbon is getting kind of moved around in this cycle in these different compounds and switching between organic and inorganic forms. So now let's switch over to the nitrogen cycle and talk about how prokaryotes are involved in the cycling or processing of nitrogen. So just like with the carbon cycle, prokaryotes are going to be involved in converting nitrogen between inorganic and organic forms. So remember we talked about how organic compounds have to have carbon and hydrogen, but they can also have nitrogen in them. They don't have to have nitrogen, but they can. So there are organic compounds that also contain nitrogen. But there are also some compounds that include nitrogen, and they might have carbon or hydrogen, but not both. Prokaryotes are especially important because if we take a look at our atmosphere, so the air in Earth's atmosphere is about 78% nitrogen gas, which we can abbreviate as N2. So it's just two atoms of nitrogen bonded together that forms this gas. Now, the interesting thing is that plants and animals need nitrogen, but they are not able to process nitrogen gas. So even though plants and animals are surrounded by 78% of our air being this nitrogen gas, it is not accessible to us in a way that we need it. And so that's where prokaryotes come into play. They are able to convert that nitrogen gas into forms that plants and animals can then use. And one reason why living organisms need nitrogen is to make proteins and nucleic acids. So if we do a quick review of proteins, remember that proteins are made of amino acids. And all amino acids have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in them. The nucleic acid bases also have nitrogen. So nucleic acids, remember, consist of nucleotides. And our nucleotides include adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And all of these include carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So on the next slides, we're going to talk about how prokaryotes are involved in this nitrogen cycle. And we'll be talking about these different nitrogen-containing compounds, and also potentially talking about some proteins and nucleic acids. The chemical reactions that prokaryotes do in order to convert nitrogen from one form to another can take these three forms. So there's nitrogen fixation, nitrification, and denitrification. And we're going to talk about each one of these types of chemical reactions on the following slides. During the process of nitrogen fixation, gaseous nitrogen is converted into a form that plants can use. So we've got our N2, and so this is just the gas that is in the atmosphere. And then NH3 is ammonia. And you can see that process happening here on this image in a couple of different places. So we have nitrogen fixing bacteria in root nodules of legumes. And so there are some bacteria that actually have a symbiotic relationship with the roots of plants, where they essentially hang out with the roots of plants and they help to convert this nitrogen gas into ammonia so the plant can use it. There's also nitrogen fixing bacteria that also just hang out in the soil. And once again, they are going to produce or convert that nitrogen gas to ammonia. And then that ammonia can eventually be converted into other forms of nitrogen and ultimately end up in the plant. Another way that bacteria are involved in the nitrogen cycle is through this process known as nitrification. And this is where the ammonia that was produced during nitrogen fixation can now be converted to other forms of nitrogen-containing compounds. And these other forms might be more accessible to plants in order to take up that nitrogen so that they can make things like amino acids and nucleic acids. So in this case, we have ammonium ions, and so this is just an ionic form of ammonia. That can get converted into nitrites and nitrates. And we can see this happening over on this picture here. So remember, we've got our ammonia that was created during nitrogen fixation, and then nitrification occurs when bacteria convert that ammonia into our nitrites or our nitrates. And this primarily happens in the soil. So there are specific bacteria that hang out in the soil in order to do these chemical reactions to make that nitrogen available for plants. During denitrification, bacteria convert soil nitrate into gaseous compounds, which might include nitric acid, so the NO, nitrous oxide, the N2O, or nitrogen gas, N2. And this NO3 negative, this is the nitrate. And you can see that process happen over here with the denitrifying bacteria, where it can take these nitrates, and in this example, it's converting it back to that atmospheric nitrogen. So it's helping to maintain this homeostasis so that the nitrogen is either being converted into a way that plants can use, or it's being released back into the environment where it might need to be transported to somewhere else so that nitrogen can be made available for other organisms.